So again, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are. I am Dr. Shabnam Daskar, a functional medicine consultant, and I am very happy to have my wonderful associate and friend, Michael Offer, who is a digestive health expert. Michael, will you introduce yourself to our audience because many of them have probably not met you before?
Right. Yes. So I'm so excited to be here and I'm happy to meet everybody. My name is Michal Offa. I am a nutrition consultant. I specialize in digestive health more than anything else here in Calgary with Dr. Carr. And yeah, so I help people on the food side of things balance their guts so that they can, and balance their digestive tract so that they can achieve some health, right? Achieve better levels of health, often optimal health. But my belief is that without the food being settled down, nothing else works, right? If your digestive tract isn't working, and if you're not putting good stuff into your digestive tract, the rest of your health is going to suffer. And if the rest of your health is suffering, if you don't address that, along with some other things, but if you don't address that, chances are you're never going to get as well as you could. So Dr. Carr and I share very much of the same philosophies. Medications are great, but they're not the be all and end all. We'd prefer you to not have them. And we look at the body as a whole. How does each system affect each other system? And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So I'm very excited to be here with everybody. And thank you, Dr. Carr, for inviting me on.
Thank you, Mikhail. I mean, you brought up so many interesting things. And so I'm going to start off with sharing a PowerPoint. Sorry. Mm, if you have heard me speak before, you know that I cannot, I need a PowerPoint most of all to stay on track, I think, Mikhail. Otherwise, you and I, we can go down so many rabbit holes.
For sure.
So that's just the two of us. So irritable bowel syndrome. Now, I'm not going to go in details about this particular slide about how we in functional medicine look at any condition, whether it is irritable bowel syndrome or it is, inflammatory bowel disease or any kind of gut issue, whether it is a hormonal problem, whether it is your thyroid, Hashimoto's, anything. We look at many different areas. Now, in my previous videos, I have talked a little bit more in detail. So here I'm not going to speak more in details, but in IBS, all these areas are also equally important. That is what I wanted to stress upon. And of course, food is primary. So in our world, food is medicine. And food is signals to your gut microbiome. Food is signals to your genes. So obviously, unless food is, optimized, and it is different things for different people. It is never the same thing for each and everyone. So I don't want to go into the symptoms of IBS because if you are here on this webinar, obviously you are interested in IBS and you know what it is. But what I wanted to highlight is this is the change that I was talking about. So the Rome Foundation is a very big organization of gastroenterologists worldwide, and they are people who actually decide what is like how to define an illness, what are the standard treatments, what are the things we should look at. And for a long time, IBS was, people with IBS were told that, oh, it's all in your head, and given some anti-anxiety medications, antidepressant medications. And I'm not saying those medications don't have a role, they do. But you'll understand that Mikhal and I don't consider prescription drugs as the first line of treatment for everything, and particularly when it comes to gut. Now, something like hypertension, I would definitely say you need a prescription medication first. So the goal of treatment is what works best for you. So now the Rome Foundation describes IBS as a disorder of gut brain interaction, so DGBI. Now, there is a lot of significance in the fact that the term gut comes before the brain. And we know that, the gut and the brain they constantly talk to each other. And so the gut is telling the brain a lot of things, and this is information we did not know before. So, what are the things that the gut brain axis influences. You can see anxiety, mood, behavior, stress response, gut motility, gut microbes. And as you can see, all these things are also things that impact IBS. So this is, I think, this is a very big, very big thing in the IBS world. But unfortunately, a lot of this information doesn't always reach the community doctor. So some people with IBS may still be told, "Oh, it's just your anxiety which is making you like that. You know, it's giving you butterflies in the stomach and making you rush to the toilet every time you eat something." No, it's not entirely that. It's not your personal shortcoming. That is the most important thing I want to say. And sometimes people are made to feel like IBS is a condition you can just overcome if you just had more, I don't know, positivity or will force, or I don't know what people are told, but that is not true. So, just what we are going to talk about today, and I'm sort of rushing because I want you to go away from this with some things you can do for yourself. We'll talk about food, obviously, that's a big one. Probiotics, is there a role? What are the things you should look for in a probiotic, and what are the challenges with some of the probiotics available? What is new? The stuff that is new is very exciting actually, because anyway, we'll come to that later. So, Mikhail, I'm going to hand over to you when it comes to food, because you are my go-to person when it is anything to any question related to food. Now, one thing I wanted to share, it's kind of funny that when I try to look for an image, not try, when I look for an image to, illustrate something, I'm always struggling. So you can see here there are onions in it, and then I'm thinking, oh, the low FODMAP diet should not be having that. So my point is, this picture does not necessarily represent the kind of food that you would be eating, because you may be sensitive to some of these. And I'll hand over to Mikhail to talk about it. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen because you want to see Mikhail speaking. Mikhail, you're muted and your video is turned off.
I am on my way there right now.
Okay.
Okay. So, of course, if you're having tummy problems, thinking that food isn't impacting your tummy problems is absolutely illogical, right? And we're often told that by doctors. It has nothing to do with what you eat. Now, we do know that the gut and the brain are directly related. They speak to each other. So there are certain parts of our lifestyle that can impact our digestion. And we know butterflies in the stomach, right? When we get nervous, or sometimes when people get stressed, they feel nauseous. We know this. However, if it's a consistent and constant disruption in your digestion, it probably has a little more, your food is impacting it a whole lot more, I would say. So what they've discovered, and over a period of time, is that the body has no problem breaking down things in the upper part of the digestive tract. That's the stomach, and in the upper part of the small intestine, which is called the jejunum or the duodenum. Now, those are big words. Don't worry, there's not going to be a test on that. But this is important because what this means is that food that gets digested lower down, or food that gets broken down in the small intestine, or even more so in the large intestine by the gut bacteria, which I know Dr. Carr has spoken about many times before, is the things that can create problems with our lower digestion. So there's a distinct difference between the types of food that get digested higher up on the digestive tract and lower down. Proteins and fats tend to get digested higher up. Carbohydrates tend to be digested lower down. Now, when we think of carbohydrates, we often just think of starches. So we think of bread or rice or porridge or roti or potatoes. But if you've watched any of our YouTube videos before, and I recommend going and watching some because it's much more complicated than I've got time to explain, but anything that isn't a protein specifically from an animal or an oily thing, a fat, and there's good fats and bad fats, but we're not getting into that right now. Anything else is a carbohydrate. And many of these carbohydrates are very big molecules. So after we've chewed them and swallowed them, they're really big molecules. And some people struggle to break them down. Now, there's many reasons for that, and we're not going to get into that today. I want to talk about these specific types of carbohydrates. So they're big molecules. We struggle to break them down, or the bacteria in our gut get very, very overexcited when they're fed them, and they have a party eating them. And we all know when we eat too much, we can get gas, they get gas, and they start to malfunction or be imbalanced. And this creates problems for us. So there's a whole range of these carbohydrates, and you might have heard of them. They're grouped together in a clump called FODMAPs. Now, FODMAP stands for fermentable, which means that your gut bacteria can eat them and digest them and ferment them and get them to go sour. Oligo, mono, poly, and disaccharides. So a saccharide is a type of carbohydrate. It sounds a little bit like sugar, right? Saccharide, sugar, saccharin was derived from that word. And so and sugars are carbohydrates, and sugars aren't just the sweet things. Sugars physiologically are the things we talk about, what they break down into, which is glucose. So these specific carbohydrates are the ones that the gut bacteria go a little nuts on. Now, if you're struggling with your gut, you might be struggling with all of these types of carbohydrates or sugars, or you might just be struggling with one or two different types. So there's different types. Now, that becomes, so then you say, well, how do I know which ones apply to me? So one of the treatments for IBS, or one of the things that we use to manage IBS, is initially you go on something called a low FODMAP diet. So we take out all of these foods. We take them out for a good period of time, so 30 to 60 days, sometimes 90. And then you start to challenge your microbiome, your body, and add them back in one at a time or different types to see if you are able to tolerate any. Now, there are other healing protocols that you can do at the same time. Part of them is, some of it is strengthen your digestive tract at the top to help you break them down a little higher up so they don't get down to your gut bacteria. That's for another time. Here, we're talking specifically about these foods. And you're probably thinking, okay, Michal, get on to it. We've done with all the science. What are these foods? So they're foods that we love, unfortunately. And most famously, or most notoriously, are foods from the allium family. So alliums are the things that give food a lot of flavor. So onion, garlic, leek, shallots, those, the onion family. And those are a problem because the gut, they have compounds in them. So, and a lot of those compounds are very healthy compounds in a well-functioning gut. But in a gut that is not functioning optimally, or that is slightly imbalanced for multiple reasons, these create huge problems. And of all the IBS people that I see, and I see many of them, because many people struggle with IBS along with a whole bunch of other stuff. The most common problem with food is something in the allium family. And that's, and sad, right? Because people don't like to hear that. There's also the brassica family, which tend to be really problematic. Think of foods that actually smell when you cook them. Those are the compounds. And cooking doesn't take away the compounds that cause the problems for the gut. Yeah. So if you're thinking of the brassica family, we're thinking of cauliflower and broccoli and cabbage and kohlrabi and Brussels sprouts, that family of foods. We also have the grains. So gluten is a FODMAP. And often people who discover that they have a gluten sensitivity, it is probably a little wider and larger, and it's more of a FODMAP problem than a specific gluten problem. Gluten is problematic for us for so many reasons. And again, Dr. Cara and I have discussed this multiple times in multiple videos, but gluten is a big one. So although some grains might not be the best grains for your blood sugar or for your health, gluten-free grains tend to be better tolerated by the bacteria in the small intestine. So from a FODMAP perspective, gluten-free grains are better. Legumes can be problematic as well, depending on the amount that you eat, right? Very fibrous vegetables, so all of the very crunchy lettuces. Like I said, it's a lot of the things that we really love. So, and I'm talking like really hard crunchy lettuces like kale. Spinach tends to be okay. Kale tends to be problematic because it's got lots and lots of fiber. Remember, fermentable, and fiber ferments. We don't digest fiber. The gut bacteria ferment it, and it creates lots of problems. Even sometimes things like cucumber, the skins of a cucumber, again, very, very fibrous, right? If you ever hold any of those things up to the light, you can see the little cells of the plant, and the walls of those cells is something called cellulose, which is a FODMAP. Not so much fun. And then very, very sadly, for many people, we have fructose. And fructose is a FODMAP. Fructose does not get into our bloodstream. Fructose is only metabolized in the liver if it gets there. But your gut bacteria love fructose just as much as you do. And fructose is found in many fruits and many of the yummy fruits, right? The tropical fruits, the mangoes and the bananas and the papayas, right? Really, really high in FODMAP. Coconut, a food that's really, really healthy, is a FODMAP. Avocado, a food that everybody loves, so much fiber that it's a FODMAP. And Dr. Carr, are you able to send a FODMAP list to everybody who signed up for the webinar? Because we can. Yeah, we can send a list of high and low because there's so many and it's so complicated. And I don't want to get into all the nitty-gritty details, but I will say that if you're struggling with IBS, cutting out the alliums, the onion garlic, and cutting out the brassicas should already provide a lot of relief, because those tend to be the ones that people struggle with the most, right? And as I said, as your gut heals, you might be able to add some of these things in certain amounts and in certain preparations. So sometimes I find that onion powder or garlic powder is okay for some patients later on, but not always, right? It might be a permanent thing for you. And I know that's sad and that might not make you happy, but right, at the same time, at least this is a way not to be tied to either the bathroom because you don't know when the next time you're going to have an explosive episode is, or in pain, right? The gas and the bloating and not being able to have a bowel movement. So I wanted to give that kind of a nice overview of why this happens and how the foods that we eat can impact that. And I could go on for the entire hour, and I don't want to do that because there's so many other factors that can impact the IBS. Is there something else you wanted me to cover, Dr. Carr?
So yeah, thank you, Mikhail. That was such a wonderful explanation. So I'm going to be the devil's advocate and say that, do we all need a low FODMAP diet? Anyone with IBS? So why Mikhail and I started off with talking about the low FODMAP diet is because there have been, if you just Google, you'll find that there's a lot of literature, clinical studies which have supported a low FODMAP diet. But in my personal practice, and I'm sure, Mikhail, you do the same as well, we don't always start with a low FODMAP diet. Now, each one of you is in a different stage of your journey. Some of you have already, been dealing with this for a long time. You've met quite a few, nutritionists and gastroenterologists. Of course, gastroenterologists did not tell you anything about food. So if you are at that stage, then yes, and you've not got any relief from doing what we talked about in one of the previous webinars, and a basic elimination diet. So you're eliminating, gluten, Mikhail mentioned, dairy, soy, processed food, sugar. So that would take care of a lot of the problems. Then the next comes, maybe some of you just doing a basic elimination diet. And I'm not going into an elimination diet now because we've talked about it before. So some of you are doing fantastically well with just a basic elimination diet. So Mikhail, sometime a few months ago, I was having this conversation with a gastroenterologist from India. And so he's a specialist and he's from an academic center. So he actually does clinical research and in IBS. And he's got quite a lot of research on serotonin in IBS and all that. So he was talking about the low FODMAPs diet. And I told him, I said, doctor, would you be open to trying a basic elimination diet? Because low FODMAPs diet is very difficult for a lot of people. And if any of you have tried a low FODMAP diet, you know that you require a lot of hand holding. It's not like, we send you a PDF. This is low FODMAP, this is high FODMAP, and you're good to go. So it's similar to the elimination diet, but a low FODMAP diet is more difficult because it includes a lot of the food which we otherwise would love you to eat, like brassica vegetables, onions, garlic. These have a lot of, and they add a lot of flavor too. So bottom line is, not all of you may need a low FODMAPs, but if you do, then just be aware that it's not an easy thing to do. So basic elimination diet is what I would recommend you start off with. So Mikhail, yes, I know you raised your hand. You wanted to say something. Go ahead.
I do. And it's just an interesting a thought experiment that, IBS tends to be this waste basket, this waste basket diagnosis, right? You struggle with your gut, you have IBS. And I will premise to say that true IBS is this dysregulation in the ability to digest carbohydrate, true IBS. And if an elimination diet works for you, which is fantastic, and that's brilliant, is it IBS or is it some food sensitivities or an inability? So it's just this thought experiment to play around with. And it's not to say that I'm not taking away from anybody's symptoms. Food sensitivities and the inability to digest certain foods is awful. It's absolutely terrible. And if it's as simple as an elimination diet and finding out that you're really sensitive to certain foods, that is the best outcome that we could have. What we're talking about is when nothing else works.
Yeah. And it's like, so this is what we keep talking about. So when you go to a practitioner, whether it's a doctor, a naturopath, or someone like Mikhail, who's a nutrition expert, you go with a set of symptoms related to the gut. So I have to keep telling people, your patient or your client doesn't show up as a diagnosis. They have certain challenges that they are dealing with. And many of you have actually figured out which are the troublesome food for you. So you know that milk makes you bloated and you don't have lactose intolerance, but milk is not something you are going to have. And some of these people, unfortunately, Mikhail, when they go and tell their doctor, I think I can't tolerate this particular thing. And the doctor says, because most of the times the doctor is not educated in nutrition, has no clue, he or she. So bottom line is, yes, a basic elimination diet. The other thing I want to stress upon is there are studies supporting this. Is Mikhail talked about all the carbohydrates. So a lower carbohydrate diet, then lower than what you're having now. It doesn't necessarily have to be a ketogenic diet. And again, Mikhail, I'm going down rabbit holes. So ketogenic diet is less than 20 grams of carbs a day. It is not necessarily a high fat diet. There's a lot of confusion about that. Ketogenic diet is only carbohydrates and not necessarily about fat and everything else. Those come later and different conditions. So a lower carbohydrate diet than what you're eating now. And I think, Mikhail, one big thing is, so there was a time when before these studies on low carb diet and IBS came out, when I used to think that, okay, they have stopped gluten, they've stopped all the grains, maybe that is the one that is, giving them the benefits. But then now we have studies. And the other thing that, Mikhail, you and I talk about, and that is what we use on our MDS program, is eating in shortened intervals of time. So that is, I'm just going to, share the slide because your gut needs rest. So so Michal, will you explain a little bit about what we mean when we say that, your gut needs to rest, and what is the migrating motor complex? I'll explain that, no worries.
Okay, so everything in our lives works in balance, and everything in our lives works in this rhythm. It's called the circadian rhythm. We often think about it as our wake sleep cycle, but it governs everything that we do. And it's the same with digestion. There needs to be time when we eat, and there needs to be time when we don't eat. Digestion is a continuous process, right? It works from start to finish. Every time we start it, anything that's going on but closer to the finish line is stopped so that the rest can catch up, right? So we need to give our body and our digestive tract time to go from start to finish, right? Also, sometimes the same way we need to rest and repair, right? Every night when you sleep, your body rests and repairs. Your gut needs an opportunity to rest and repair. I always make the joke when I say we know that the body was made by a man because it cannot be multitasking, and we cannot be digesting food and repairing the gut at the same time. And you might think, well, my gut doesn't need repair. Of course it does. You're using it every day, all the time. There's so many physiological aspects that go on in the gut. And there's going to be breakdown the same way that you have to service your car, the same way that you have to repair your house after a certain period of time, right? Your gut needs time. And it doesn't happen when we're digesting our food. And we think that digesting just happens, we eat, we digest, it goes out of the stomach. But no, there's two distinct phases to digestion. Number one is from the time we eat and the food goes down through the stomach, through the small intestine. That's phase one. And then it goes through the ileocecal valves, it goes through a valve into the large intestine, and then it goes through all of that, and then eventually it's all absorbed and everything's done with it, and then waste is eliminated. And that's phase two. And phase one generally takes between 4 and 6 hours. So if you're eating every 2 to 3 hours, you're never giving your body time to fully go through that. And then phase two can take a little longer, but sometimes it's nice to give your body a good 12, 14, 16, 18 hours to really get things moving, get everything working as it should be, bring things back into balance. If it got excited because it got too much of one thing or too little of another, when there's no food there, can say, oh, okay, this is what happened. Let me restore balance, rather than continuing to play catch up. Now, the migrating motor complex is this digestive process. It's an autonomic process. It's automatic. Your body, you don't have to think about it. You don't tell your body to digest food and to move it down the digestive tract. It's the same as breathing, or the same as your heart beating, or the same as managing your body temperature, or for the most part, your blood sugar. And when we know blood sugar is a big one, when things go wrong there, things go wrong. And you don't want things to go wrong in your migrating motor complex. And you'll get into that in more detail. But one of the things about resting, about not eating, is giving your body time to reset this beautiful movement that allows us to go from start to finish.
Thank you, Michal. So basically, again, I'm just reiterating what Michal said. Your gut needs, it's working when you are eating food, and then it needs a resting wave as well. And I know many of you are thinking, I don't eat all the time. Well, I would suggest that just try tracking. So some years ago, they had done a study, and they found that, and this was done actually, one of them was Dr. Sachin Panda's study in India, in Delhi. And he's done in the US. And so what he found is many people eat for 15 hours of the day. So as he says, your mouth is open as long as your eyes are open. And then the other myth, Mikhail, that many people have been taught is you need to eat 3 meals and six snacks or 3 snacks now?
Yeah, 6 meals a day.
6 meals a day. You need to eat small amount, and particularly people with diabetes are told you need to eat little bit every 2 hours. Recently, I was talking to a person with diabetes for many years, and I said, "Why do you feel hungry when you're eating, one particular food?" She said, "No, my dietitian said I should eat every 2 hours." So Anyway, bottom line is you don't need to eat every 2 hours. But the other thing is you should not be nibbling. So you need to eat good meals. And Mikhail, what do you recommend on an average people should, how much time should be between two meals?
A minimum of 4 to 6 hours.
Mhm. So if they
That's
have to stay without food for 4 to 6 hours, obviously they have to eat well. And when we talk about eating well, we always talk about prioritizing protein. So sometimes I think, Mikhail, you and I sound like stuck records. We keep talking about the same things over and over
but
again.
it's important. It's honestly, it's the simplest. It's not easy,
No.
but it's simple. If you eat sufficient protein, you can go for days. Sometimes I know this might sound shocking to people, but for days without food, going for 4 hours or 5 hours without food has become absolutely shocking to people. Oh my goodness, I will die.
Yeah.
No, you will not die. When you're sleeping, you go for 8 hours without food and you don't die.
Mhm.
But your body requires food when you need nourishment. What it does with that nourishment, and is important as well. Different conversation, but that's your body telling you, I need nourishment. And if you consistently and constantly need nourishment, something's not working properly.
Mhm. Absolutely. And you brought up diabetes. So just one more thing, just an aside I wanted to mention is diabetes causes problems of gut motility. So there is something called gastroparesis. Again, a big sound. These clever sounding words, I think, are meant for, so that doctors sound very, impressive. I don't know. So gastroparesis is again another problem more common in people with diabetes, where the gut does not move as well as it should. And again, as you know, diabetes affects, the nervous system as well. And obviously the nerves have to work well for the gut to move. So just one more thing, because sometimes people don't realize that the problem is they don't have good blood sugar control, which is impacting everything else. Now, I think we are going to run out of time. I'm going to go back to my slide and sorry, I keep clicking on the wrong stuff. The next thing I wanted to talk about was, probiotics. So basically, what are probiotics? Probiotics are usually in capsule form. They contain a bunch of different bacteria. And I have talked about probiotics in another webinar, so I'm not going to talk about in details in this because in IBS, if you read on the internet or if you are going into the medical literature, gastroenterology, you will find that sometimes the problem is with the studies because they are small studies. Now, if they are small studies, they just 10 people on the study, then the results, the outcome may not be very significant because we don't know. So anyway, long story short, yes, probiotics have helped many of our patients, Mikhail. That is, like, we've heard so many people coming back and telling us that, doctor, the probiotics that you gave us made my IBS so much better. So bottom line is there is no other way other than trying out different probiotics to see what works. And most importantly, they have to contain a significant amount of bacteria in them. Number one, it have to contain a different, like many different species and strains, and they have to be at a dosage where we talk about a billion colony forming units, billion with a B, so at least 30 billion colony forming units. And in the interest of time, I'm rushing through. So, Mikhail, this was one study which was very interesting. So what they did, I know what people do is, oh, probiotics, I'm just going to buy from my local health food store. So this was in 2004, and this was from British Columbia. So they just randomly chose 10 different probiotic preparations bought over the counter, no prescription, and they decided to look at only those products which claimed to contain lactobacillus. And Mikhail, we know that the results were not surprising at all, because this is the problem with the entire supplement industry, the non-pharmaceutical products industry, is that they don't have the same kind of quality control as pharmaceutical products have. So interestingly, what did they find? So none of the 10 products tested matched their labeled microbiologic specifications. So they claimed they contained blah, 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 blah. They didn't. Two brands grew nothing, and you don't know which those brands would be. No, lactobacillus grew in 5 brands, although their label stated that this was the main species. 8 brands contain viable cells, but only 10% of the number stated by their manufacturers. So, bottom line, my point in sharing this particular study is, yes, you may go to the local health food store and look at something, and it looks very good because it has all the the right ingredients and the right strains and everything, but you take it and after 1 month you feel this is not really working for me. So is that the problem of the probiotics, or is it a problem of that particular product? That is something extremely important to so that is the reason when you buy so better quality probiotics have a lot of things, like they have to have sufficient number of live bacteria. Like you can see, there were only 10% had viable, they had viable cells, but they were not at the numbers that they were supposed to have, because with probiotics the shelf life is extremely important. So will they contain the same amount at the end of the shelf life as they did at the beginning? And how were they manufactured? Because obviously good quality manufacturing is more expensive. So a lot of different things to keep in mind. So Mikhail, to this probiotics, would you like to add something that that you found in your experience?
Um, good quality as you said, good quality probiotics, something that's been third party tested, something that's physician grade. You pay more, it makes a difference because it actually works. And that's it, right? Some people respond really well to probiotics, some people don't. But you won't know unless you use a good quality probiotic. It's part of a gut healing protocol,
Mhm.
and really, really, really important to get the good bacteria in there that don't go nuts and crazy on all of those carbohydrates.
But of course, food comes first. So if you're not going to change your food, you're just going to add a probiotic. Some of you may get some results, but most of the time, it's like it's not, the probiotic cannot really overcome any food sensitivities or any of the problems with food. They can help, but they're not the only thing. So this is the new thing, Mikhail, which I found very exciting. So this was a paper which came out in January this year. So again, good thing is this was not just an animal study, they looked at humans as well. So what they found is, this is where and I'm not going to go into the details of histamine and what is mast cell. So basically a mast cell is one of the immune cells which is more of an allergic reaction, so allergic immune reaction. And when it breaks because of some allergic response, it releases a lot of chemicals. Histamine is one of them. So what they found is, so this was the exciting part in the medical world, is when you find a particular pathway that is impacted, because then the next thing, Mikhail, is how can we target that pathway? So which particular drug is going to target the pathway, versus Mikhail and I are looking at what are the the nutrients, what are the food that could impact that particular pathway. So what they found is IgE, again, that is one of the immunoglobulins. So why I brought up IgE here is, some people, Mikhail, you and I have talked about this before. In India, they'll just go to the lab and they can go and get a test done without a doctor's prescription. They get a food allergy testing done. A food allergy is not a food sensitivity. So IgE and mast cell dependent mechanisms, they induced increased visceral pain. So one of the mechanisms that people with IBS are supposed to have is, they are more sensitive to similar stimuli, and that sensitivity shows up as abdominal pain. So what they found is, when they injected food antigens like gluten, wheat, soy, milk into the large bowel of patients with IBS, it induced local edema and mast cell activation. So edema is local swelling. So why I have highlighted that part in black is because this is happening inside the bowel. So if you are testing for, let us say, and I don't even know whether you get histamine tests done everywhere in the world. I have never done it on any patient yet. So if you are going to test in blood, it may not show up because it is happening locally in the gut. So that is one thing I just wanted to highlight. So obviously in the medical world, we talk about maybe an antihistaminic, so an anti-allergy medication can help. Versus in our functional medicine world, Mikhail and I will obviously look at, is it a food sensitivity which is increasing the histamine? Then there are some natural antihistaminic supplements as well. So it gives us a whole lot more options rather than just, one drug and one medication. So I think that's the last slide. And the session is open to questions now. Feel free to type them in the chat box or in the Q&A box at the bottom, and Michal and I will respond to your questions.
Yeah, I think that the whole histamine discussion is so interesting,
Yeah.
Dr. Carr. And again, it circles back to our modern diets,
Yep.
right? And everything tends to circle back to our modern diets. The further we stray away from our ancestral diets, and I'm not talking about a diet of 50 or 60 years ago, I'm talking about a diet of thousands and thousands of years ago. The more we stray from that, the more problematic it becomes. So we have a question. Did you want to read it?
Is fibromyalgia caused by IBS, or IBS causes fibromyalgia? Any tips for that? So, very good question. Tips for constipation. One of the challenges that Michal and I have in responding to a question like that is, for each one of you, it is different. Yes, because we look at a network of networks, there's so many things happening. So, is fibromyalgia causing IBS or IBS causing fibromyalgia? I would say they can both be present at the same time. And again, it's like going back to, so anyone who comes to us with fibromyalgia or IBS, we would always start with the gut. And if it is a constipation type of IBS, first and foremost, we'll look at, what are the food you're eating. So for constipation, food sometimes has a huge impact. So Michal, what else would you add to the fibromyalgia, IBS, constipation question?
I think that they both impact each other.
Mhm.
So the fibromyalgia can cause nerve damage, right? Or it can impact how your nerves function. And as you spoke about earlier, your nervous system is very, especially the stuff that happens automatically, is very important for digestion. So rather than looking at which causes which, look at them both impacting each other and managing them both. Now, often the management of one and the management of the other overlap a lot, especially when it comes to food and food sensitivity and particles of food getting into our body that we're just not equipped, that each individual on an individual basis is not equipped to deal with. So constipation. Now, this is going to be an interesting one for people, because people have heard for years and years that the best way to deal with constipation is to increase fiber. And I'm going to turn that on its head, and I'm going to say decrease fiber. Fiber can slow down the bowel motility, can slow down that migrating motor complex. A slow migrating motor complex is constipation. I would also say increase your good fats, and possibly, and this is probably a little more than what we are allowed to discuss on this webinar, but do some digestive support for the upper stomach. So even some digestive enzymes, or including some sour foods in your diet, and a high quality probiotic. All of those tend to be really helpful. But the low fiber one is one that people are often shocked about, and it actually works really well.
Yeah, thank you. So we have another question. Great discussion. Oh, thank you that you like the discussion. Would you also look at natural probiotics from food? And there are two parts to the question. Also, would you look at different protocols for IBS-C versus IBS-D? So, Michal, I'll let you start off with the natural probiotics from food, and then I'll add.
Probiotics from food are brilliant. They're wonderful. There's a problem, though, in that we can't measure them, or they have measured them, and they found that they're really, really rich in probiotics. Like if you have a real sauerkraut, an unpasteurized sauerkraut, even a small teaspoon can have billions and billions and billions of colonies of different types of bacteria. This is great. And if your gut is working well, it's probably one of the best ways to ensure diversity and good populations of good bacteria. The problem with natural probiotics, number one, is unless you're making them yourself, you need to be sure of the source. If they've been heated in any way whatsoever, they are dead. So people think yogurt is such a good source of probiotic. It is not. It is dead because the milk has been pasteurized. Because we can't measure, we don't know exactly which strains of bacteria are present, and it'll be different. If I make sauerkraut and if Dr. Carr makes sauerkraut, the bacteria will be totally different because my house, my hands, my environment, the cabbage that I got, her house, her hands, her environment, the cabbage that she got. So when we're looking to treat, to target and treat, although we don't know a lot about the microbiome, we know some. And we know certain bacterial strains are really good and necessary to increase the diversity of. And having a good food grade, a good physician grade supplement can really help us monitor exactly, right? We know this is working, we know this isn't, we know why. Or we have a very good idea of why. So food probiotics are, as I said, fantastic and brilliant, but especially from a therapeutic perspective. And I know Dr. Carr would probably agree strongly with me here. It's important to have something that we know what it is and that we can measure it. Different protocols for IBS-C versus IBS-D, yes and no. Again, very, very personal and individual. The same person, two different people can have a sensitivity to a certain food, and one can experience slowed motility, which is constipation, and the other person can experience speeded up motility, which is diarrhea. And both of the body's response to something it doesn't know what to do with. Doesn't know what to do with, let me slow down and take my time and look at it. Or something that it doesn't know what to do with, okay, get this out of me right away. So again, really individual. We often start off in the same place though. Elimination diet, are you sensitive to certain foods? Fodmap diet, again, and low fiber and lowering your fiber, because fiber can both create constipation and diarrhea.
Thank you, Mikhail. So to the natural probiotic question, I just want to add. So when it comes to natural probiotic from things like, sauerkraut, kimchi, or any of these. So one important thing to bear in mind is if you are from, if your ancestors were having sauerkraut or your ancestors were having kimchi or, from fermented soy like tempeh and any of these, then for you it may work very differently. Like I come from Indian ancestry, and for us sauerkraut and kimchi were not like what my ancestors ate. So the response in someone who comes from an ancestry of people who've been eating that versus someone for whom this is a new food may be very different. And again, it goes back to the gut bacteria and the enzymes that are present. So they did a study on the Japanese gut and the US gut. So essentially a Western population and Japanese people living in Japan. And they found that the Japanese gut had some soy processing enzymes which were not present in the US gut. And again, iodine is another big one because Japan is an island, so people eat a whole lot more of seafood. So their tolerance to higher levels of iodine is different from what it is in other people who are not living by the sea. And one more thing is, a lot of people in India, Mikhail, think that yogurt is like a probiotic. Yogurt is not a probiotic unless the manufacturer has added probiotics. And I have not come across any manufacturer adding therapeutic level probiotics. It will raise the cost a lot. And one more thing I wanted to mention, since we are talking about natural probiotics and fermented food. Chocolate is a fermented food, but the problem is with the sugar, of course. And the question of whether IBS-C and IBS-D we would look at different protocols. Mikhail's already responded that we still would start with food. But if someone comes to me with constipation, I would also look at other causes of constipation. And one of the commonest is thyroid, suboptimal thyroid. Hypothyroidism, if it is not treated properly, like if you might be in the range, but that can still be a problem. And of course, if there are any other more serious medical conditions, those also have to be obviously ruled out first. So yes, in some ways it would differ, but again, basically we would always start with food. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here with us today. and you will receive a recording. And Mikhail, you're going to send me a list of the low FODMAPs food. And
Yeah.
so bye now until next month.
So
And
great to be here, Dr. Carr. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
bye. Thank you, everybody.